Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's Daily Global COVID-19 Show. We're fast approaching episode 250, which is coming up this Sunday. Today, we are talking after a historic weekend. So much has happened and so much is happening now. And we want to learn what happened and what's next. We'll talk about Pennsylvania. We'll talk about Georgia. We'll talk about a president who refuses to leave his perch, who hasn't conceded, a Republican Party that has not conceded. As of right now, 4 senators have said that Joe Biden is the president-elect. We'll have a chance to talk about all of this and to take your questions. So please post in the chat and talk to us. We have a very special episode for you with 3 terrific guests. Kat Calvin is with us, at Kat Calvin LA, founder of spreadthevote.org. She's returning to us after being here several weeks ago to talk about all the work she was going to do and was doing already. Now let's hear how it all turned out. We're also joined by John Bartlett, at John W. Bartlett. He's a voting rights lawyer, an expert. He is an elected member in New Jersey. He's an office holder in New Jersey. His website is johnbartlett.com. We're also joined by Ilina Ewen, who is a writer, and she says accidental activist, and she's a longtime Get Out the Vote volunteer, and she's in North Carolina. Her website is dirtandnoise.com. You'll meet all of them in just a minute. Hi, everyone. I'm Sree. Thank you so much for being here. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation and the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting company. Our motto, don't set up your virtual event without talking to us. We've worked on projects that have had 50 attendees and projects that have had 100,000 attendees. We bet your event is somewhere between those two numbers. We love geeking out on virtual events, so please talk to us. My email address is right there. We'd love to hear from you, love to get your thoughts on everything we're talking about, and to get your feedback. If you haven't seen our show before, in our first 230 episodes, we've had more than 1 million viewers, 156 million social impressions, more than 420 guests from 71 cities in 20 countries, including the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. We're live on Scroll Global and Scroll.in, and our archives are on youtube.com/Sreenet. We're so grateful to our sponsors and to our producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31. She's live tweeting up a storm, so follow her, and also Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. And so with that, we're going to get ready to bring on stage our guests for tonight. And remember, we're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. So let me bring all our guests on stage, and please say hello to Kat, John, and Ilina. And here you go. Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for being here with us. We have New Jersey in the house. We have North Carolina. And where are you tonight, Kat?
I'm in Los Angeles.
And so we've got the country covered here. Thank you so much. Kat was with us in LA last time also. Looking forward to hearing from all of you how it's all gone down these last few days and how we can look ahead to what's on tap for the country. Let me start with Kat. Please tell us what it's been like for you, and then tell us a little bit about the organization as well, please.
Sure. So Spread the Vote is a voting rights organization. We're a nonprofit. We do 2 big things. Our main objective is to help people get government-issued photo ID. There are over 21 million eligible voters who don't have ID, which they need for jobs, housing, medical care, all sorts of things. But you also need ID to vote in 36 states. So we help people go through all the steps, pay for everything, get documents, everything it takes to get an ID. And then on the other end, we do a lot of voter education, voter turnout work, all sorts of things to help make sure that our clients and community and the larger community can get to the polls. And this year we saw a record number of people going to the polls. So it's been pretty exciting from the voting rights front. It was a really amazing election.
Well, I'd like you to brag a little bit and not be as modest as you usually are. Tell us some of the things that you were able to do that you're proud of.
Yeah, so Spread the Vote works in 12 states. One of the things that we do is we write nonpartisan voter guides for beginning voters. So 77% of our clients have never voted before. And we realized pretty early on in the organization that a lot of the voter guides and information that are out there are really written at a level that is way too high for first-time voters. So we make our own guides. We made them for all 12 states, and we shipped out. We print and publish everything. So only 1% of our clients have access to a phone, and we're really working with the most vulnerable populations who don't have regular access to phone or internet. So we sent 10,000 guides to shelters, barbershops, churches, food banks, jails, schools, all sorts of different types of organizations in 12 different states. We helped. We had a grant program. So one of the things we did during midterms that we did again is that we found small organizations or student groups or whatever that were trying to do their own voter turnout work in their communities, but didn't have the funds to say rent a shuttle or, I have this year sort of virtual education events or whatever. And so we gave grants to, I think it was 17 organizations in 10 states. We did a lot of just voter turnout ourselves, getting buses and cars and Lyfts and Ubers this year and taking our clients and community members to the polls. We had a vote by mail-in jail program. We worked with over 50 jails in over 18 states. Helping currently incarcerated citizens who are eligible to vote, register and request absentee ballots and be able to go to the polls. And on it, we did a lot. We did so much. I can't even remember all of it, and I'm really ready to sleep. And then Georgia decided I don't get to sleep, so.
Well, we'll talk about Georgia in just a bit, but congratulations on all your work, and it's really so important. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you in a minute. John, please tell us what the last few days and weeks have been like. I know you spent a lot of it in Pennsylvania.
I did, yeah. Just by way of background for viewers, I've been doing election law for almost 20 years now, the entirety of my legal career. I've been doing voting rights work. Most of that here in New Jersey, but also being involved in a large Voting Rights Act litigation between the DNC and the RNC, number of other cases. And I've trained election day lawyers to do election protection and look out for those voters like Kat has been registering, the vulnerable ones, the ones that are going to get challenged at the polls, the ones that are going to be challenged in getting understanding their rights and making sure they have the opportunity to carry out those rights. And I did that in Pennsylvania, my childhood home. I grew up in a little town called Hershey, known for its chocolate. And I spent most of last week, about an hour north of there, in the upper Susquehanna Valley, just protecting the rights of voters, particularly vote-by-mail voters. And since then, I've been, as all of you have, watching the results be revealed. And I use that phrase, be revealed, because it's important to remember, we've got one party and we've got an incumbent president who's trafficking in the idea that these votes keep showing up. What's happening as votes get counted is we are revealing the decisions that voters made before and on election day. And that's an important thing to understand as you talk about, well, how was Pennsylvania red on Tuesday, but by Saturday it was blue enough that they called the election for Joe Biden? And the answer is, in one sense, very ordinary. It always takes a couple of days to count all the ballots that have been cast. In fact, the U.S. military has been voting by mail for 160 years. Under federal law, their ballots can continue to come in well into this week and still get counted. What's been unusual about this year in Pennsylvania and across the country is how many people are using that vote by mail or absentee voting option. In the area of northern Pennsylvania where I was, 4 years ago, about 500 people voted by mail. This year, about 5,000 people voted by mail in the particular county where I spent a lot of election day, keeping an eye on the pre-canvass and canvassing process. So the numbers are much higher. And what I saw in Pennsylvania is probably not going to be surprising to people who listen to Donald Trump tell everybody that you got to go on election day and you got to vote in the machine, and that's the only kind of vote you can trust. The folks that voted on election day where I was in the
county
machine,
where I spent
that
a lot of
broke
election
down.
day, keeping an eye on the pre-canvass
That
and
broke
canvassing
down.
process. So,
Sorry,
go
I had
ahead.
an audio issue there. The folks that voted in the machine, that vote went for Donald Trump by 80 to 20%. The folks that voted by mail, even in that very conservative part of northern Pennsylvania, 60% of the vote by mail votes were for Joe Biden. So folks that were concerned about COVID, that were paying attention to science, that were listening to our candidate and our campaigns talk about how we really ought to be voting by mail for public health reasons, did so. And when you see that difference between the result in the machines and the result in the vote by mail in a swing state like Pennsylvania, you see why Donald Trump is targeting those vote by mail voters. And in fact, he filed a lawsuit just a couple of hours ago that I've been reading before we went on the air tonight, targeting everybody, every last person in Pennsylvania who voted by mail.
And so the implication there is that they should not have done that, even though a Republican legislature made that possible.
Exactly. Every state has some version of the right to vote by mail. In most states now, including Pennsylvania for most of the last 10 years, you don't even need an excuse. When I was growing up, I remember I had to sign, oh, I'm away at college, and that's why I need a mail-in ballot. Most states have no excuse mail-in voting right now. And in particular, more states like Pennsylvania adopted it in response to COVID. What the president is trying to do now is going beyond the rhetoric of a week or two ago, where he was targeting those votes that came in after Election Day, voted and mailed on or before Election Day, but came in after Election Day. He was going after those votes until he saw that if you only count the votes that came in by Election Day, he was still losing by at least 50,000 votes. So his new theory in the litigation he filed earlier this afternoon is that everybody who voted by mail, all 600-some thousand Pennsylvanians, all however many million people across the other states where he's going to be filing suits like these, should lose their right to vote.
And we will certainly talk about that. And in a minute, I'm going to ask John also to compare this to the Supreme Court. A lot of people worried about the Supreme Court, including comparing it to the year 2000. But let's talk to Ilina, whose name I am constantly mispronouncing. So I'm going to have her say it, and I'm so sorry that I'm doing that.
Hi, it's Ilina. So you were very close. Ilina.
Ilina, sorry.
It's all those vowels that make it difficult.
But welcome, and thank you for being here. You're in North Carolina, and you're very active in the Get Out the Vote efforts there. So talk about that for us, please.
Yeah, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and North Carolina has traditionally been a pretty progressive beacon of the South. We've been a solidly purple state for a long time, but the last couple elections we have turned out for Trump, which is really disappointing. I have been an election volunteer and community volunteer most of my adult life. My parents and my brother, all of us have been out there knocking on doors, pounding our steps in whatever city we happen to live in. My mother even was part of Democrats Abroad in Germany where she lives. So it's not just been a reaction to the 2016 election. This is just something that I've done my whole life. It's how I was raised. So it is heartening to see more people out there volunteering. My husband and I were out doing Get Out the Vote efforts, canvassing the weekend before the election. And, it's funny, it was his very first time canvassing. All these years I've done it with friends. And finally this year he said, I've had enough. I want to go do this with you. And what we found is a lot of confusion. We had early voting shut down on October 31st at 3:00. And a lot of people thought they could still vote Sunday, but our General Assembly took away Sunday early voting. And then early voting sites are not necessarily election day sites. So there was a lot of confusion around where people were to go vote. I don't ever canvass in my own neighborhood by design. I also happen to live in a really active precinct and they don't really need me to canvass, but that's beside the point. But I think that really one of the biggest things I found was, one, the sense of people who were very confused about the election, and not just first-time voters, but people who have voted before. And the other thing was there was a real profound sense of disenfranchisement that I heard from people, a lot of despair among all ages of people saying, my vote doesn't even matter, or I don't matter, especially among people of color, saying, I don't matter, nobody out there is going to represent me. I've tried to speak up and be heard before and nobody cares. So that's really heartbreaking. And any response to that kind of vulnerability sounds like a bunch of platitudes, but I definitely tried my best to honor what they were saying and hear what they were saying and tell them we really do need you to vote, and that we're never going to see change in this country if we don't have a groundswell of people show up. To me, voting is better than Christmas morning. I love election day. I wake up and I'm like, okay, boys, it's election day. And actually last year, even in our municipal election, I happened to have an emergency appendectomy the day before the election. And I hobbled in. I mean, this is America, so nobody keeps you in the hospital overnight for anything. So, they cut me in and sent me home. So I hobbled to my polling place in my pajamas, hunched over, holding my abdomen, and I still voted. And of course, that's where the backlash came, and everyone said, you should have voted early, Ilina. And so that was my lesson. But I love election day. I love voting. I love in my canvassing this year, how many young people I met, so many first-time voters. My older son is a senior in high school, so some of his friends voted for the first time. And I think it was such a toxic environment that these kids have experienced. They're all missing their senior year because of COVID. They're all stuck at home with their parents, and no teenager wants that. No. So, they all had a hand in participating in the election this year. And I like to think that this has set them on a lifelong trajectory to be really engaged in their community and participate in the process.
I think you're right. I'll also say I have two 17-year-olds who turned 17 in the pandemic in a Manhattan apartment, and so nobody wants that either. I want to go to Kat to ask what was some of the things that you just heard from Ilina, how much of that kind of resonated with the kind of folks you work with and trying to get them to vote.
Yeah, that sentiment of my vote not mattering, et cetera, it's common across all demographics, all age groups, all socioeconomic, everything. And it's one reason that, we focus really heavily on explaining local and state elections to folks, explaining how important they are to your life, that 75 to 80% of the decisions that are made by elected officials that affect your life are local and state, and explaining margins of victory. Saying like, yeah, what, it's totally fair that 100-something million people are going to vote, and there's this electoral college that's really confusing, and that you don't feel like your vote really matters. That is completely fair. But let's talk about city council or your mayor or your sheriff. This year we had so many questions about how voting relates to criminal justice reform. And when you start to talk to people and say, the number of local elections that are decided by a few hundred or a few thousand votes, depending on where you live, that's sometimes high. The fact that your House of Representatives election really is a local election, you can make impact. And the more that we explain that to people, the more that we see folks who say, oh, I am going to vote, and then they get in there for the local elections, and then sure, they'll vote for the top of the ticket too. But we really find that emphasizing how much of an impact you can have locally makes a huge difference on whether or not people think their vote matters.
And that's something that you've worked very hard to have. I want to play one of these videos for our audience so that they can hear the amount of work it takes to get people. We have an international audience here who may not understand how complicated American ballots are, especially the mail-in ones. So I'm going to play one of these and then ask John to kind of reflect on why we are in this situation. You worked all your life, as you said, on election issues and to help folks vote. Why are we in this situation? So this is a video that I'd like Kat to set up by Roy Wood Jr., the terrific comedian who many of us know and love. Tell us, first of all, how you got him and how you made all of these videos.
Sure. Well, Roy and all of the comedians that we got to join in on this, like so many artists and influencers and celebrities this year were just all really concerned and really excited to jump in and help with campaigns that they thought would help people vote. One of the things we did this year is we set up a website called readtheeffingdirections.com, which is now permanent, and we'll edit it and make sure it's up for every election. But we did that because, as John was saying, we were seeing absolutely astronomical vote by mail numbers in the primaries, but also record numbers of ballots being thrown out, very often because people don't read the effing directions. And so we set up a website that has all of the directions needed for all 50 states plus DC, very simply, including things like, you have to get this notarized. You probably have no idea what a notary is. Here's where to find one and how much they cost. And the number of Gen Zers who have no idea where to get a stamp, which is fair, because I asked them, I was like, why can't you just Google it? And they said, we did, and the only thing that came up was stamps.com. I said, that's actually fair. And so, here's where you find a stamp. And hey, if you're in New York, you need two. But we tried to just set up all of the instructions as simply as possible to make sure that anybody who read it and followed along could make sure that their ballot was correct and was counted. And then, because it can be really confusing and daunting, we wanted to make it a little snarky, a little funny, and we got all of these comedians and these great animators who made these really funny videos because voting is really complicated in this country, and we knew, particularly with new young voters, that we wanted to make it feel easy and funny and welcoming rather than scary.
Thank you so much. Let's play one of these videos.
For the love of God, read the directions. Read the directions.
Read the directions.
So you're obviously voting. That's great.
And you want to do it safely by mail. Even better.
But please, pretty please, and we want to say this as bluntly as possible,
Just read the directions.
You can vote by mail anywhere. You're doing it from home. You can do it from your bedroom. You can do it from the toilet. You could change democracy from your toilet. But that ballot don't mean if you don't read the directions.
We know it's the part you always want to skip. We do too. Over 500,000 ballots were tossed out in the primaries this year because people didn't read the directions.
So please, read the directions. In fact, we made it easy for you. Just go to this website and figure out how to fill out your ballot.
Just go to readtheeffingdirections.com.
So that is funny and useful and helpful. But John, why do we need this kind of effort to vote in this country?
That was fantastic. We need, and I wish I could use that language, we need this kind of effort because, and this goes back to something that Ilina was saying earlier, voter confusion is voter suppression. When we make it more difficult to find where to vote, to figure out how to vote, to read the form, when Pennsylvania makes you stuff it inside one envelope called a secrecy sleeve, and then put that into another envelope that you mail, it becomes, the process itself becomes daunting, becomes challenging. And in doing so, becomes disenfranchising to people who may be least likely to understand the process, even though they're most affected by it. Students and other first-time voters. Other people, Kat talked about their outreach in jails and prisons, folks who may not realize that they do still have the right to vote. In many states, folks do, even after a conviction. In a lot of states, folks are in jail awaiting trial. Those are folks without convictions that have a right to vote still. That whole set of issues and the whole idea of read the directions, but also I happen to be fortunate. I live in a state where, in a county where my county clerk put in a very detailed set of directions about how to do this. When I was in Pennsylvania and we were going through and canvassing or pre-canvassing all these vote by mail ballots, in the county that I was in, we found dozens of ballots that were these so-called naked ballots, the ballot where the voter hadn't used that internal secrecy sleeve that you're supposed to put the ballot into before you put it into the mailing envelope. Those votes were set aside and, subject to litigation, may not end up getting counted. Now, that's what the rule is, but the rule itself becomes self-fulfilling when you make it more difficult for people to understand the process that they're participating in.
And that is so tragic in a way that America makes it harder for people to vote. And the other part of it, John, if you can tell us, the Pennsylvania legislature purposely didn't allow the early prep of the mail-in votes so that they could be counted in advance. They were counting on, if you will, this chaos afterwards if they needed it.
Exactly. Look, the way you design the system will shape the outcome that you get. And that's true in terms of, the outcome in terms of a final count. It's also true in terms of the process. Here in New Jersey, we started counting mail ballots a week before Election Day because that's what our legislature allowed. In Pennsylvania, the legislature said, you can't start counting those ballots. We know there's 10 times more than there have ever been before, but you can't start counting those ballots until the polls open on Election Day morning. So at 7 a.m. on Election Day, you can start cutting open those envelopes and figuring out which ballots are naked and figuring out this and that and preparing those ballots to be scanned in the counting machine. And the fact that they did that meant that in the very populous counties, just counting the hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots in Philadelphia County or Allegheny County was going to take days and days. So you knew that you would have on Election Day that red mirage, that impression that states like Pennsylvania, where the rules were designed to do this, looked like Trump victories that day. And as the vote count continued and as the truth emerged, that fed right into a narrative that this president has been building up and designing for months, which is to create a question as to which votes really count. One of the things you're going to see, and I want to, you're so great, Sree, about, telling people to sort of be media literate and pay attention to detail. You're going to see a lot on TV and in Republican litigation, pleadings and so forth about legal votes and illegal votes. Do not play into that narrative. Any vote that has gotten through the process of checking that envelope against the person's record in the voting machine, checking that envelope against other records that may be relevant, such as death records. We actually had a ballot set aside where I was working in northern Pennsylvania because the voter had cast their vote by mail ballot and in the intervening days had passed away. And under Pennsylvania law, you have to be alive at 7 a.m. on Election Day when the polls open for your vote to count. So understand the process, but also don't buy into this notion that some kind of votes are legal and some are illegal. Some kind of votes are better or more reliable than others. Because the simple fact of the matter is this whole, I call it, and I'm not the only one who does, the Brennan Center for Justice also calls it the myth of voter fraud. This is a story that Republicans tell every time there's an election, that somewhere out there in some vague place, there's a whole bunch of people voting who shouldn't be voting. Simple fact of the matter is, every time Republicans form commissions and get prosecutors involved and try and find voter fraud, they don't find it. In the state of Pennsylvania, where Trump filed his litigation today, he's losing by 50,000 votes. There's one example that anyone can point to of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and that's in Luzerne County, where a Republican, former elected official, tried to send in his deceased mother's ballot as well as his own. Back that vote out. First of all, it was a Trump vote. Back that out. You still got 50,000 votes between Donald Trump and victory in Pennsylvania.
This is so hard to understand, especially for our folks who are not in the U.S. Before we move on, John, tell us what you tweet about. Your Twitter handle is John W. Bartlett. What do you post on?
So I'm an elected official. I'm what's called a county freeholder for folks out there who are watching from New Jersey.
Freeholder, not freeloader.
Yes. The autocorrect on your phone will make me a freeloader. I'm not a freeloader. I'm a freeholder. And that simply means I'm part of the group of people that run Passaic County, New Jersey, home of Patterson and the Patterson Great Falls, and a bunch of other great places. Please come visit. But I tweet, well, in years like this, Sree, as you can see from my feed, I tweet a whole lot about election law. I have a whole bunch of tweets from last week about what I saw in Pennsylvania. I got into it today with somebody who was saying, well, there's supposedly 450,000 people who only voted for president. Well, newsflash, a lot of people come out, and to Kat's point about which elections really matter, people come out and vote for president and don't vote the rest of the way down the ballot. So that's not an indication of fraud either. What you've got is, a whole lot of Republican storytelling right now. And one of the other things, I don't know if we were going to get to it, but people are going to start talking about whether or not there's going to be a recount. Here's what you have to know about recounts. They almost never change the outcome. And when they do, it's because the difference was this big to start with. Only twice so far in this century, a governor's race in Washington and Al Franken's U.S. Senate race, did a recount change the outcome. And in both of those races, at the end of the first count, the Republican was ahead by about 200 votes. And when they recounted it, the Republican ended up being defeated by about 100 votes. Think about how small those margins would have to be. And think about how the fact, even in a really close state like Georgia, Joe Biden is up by 10,000 votes. There's no prospect of a recount changing any of the outcomes that we're seeing. I think we're likely to see the remaining uncalled states come in for Joe Biden, with the possible exception of North Carolina. Unfortunately, Ilina, not for lack of any trying on your part. And the next thing we're all going to have to do is turn our sights to Georgia, because although Joe Biden won a decisive victory, and more than 5 million vote margin is a decisive victory in this country, even if you have to wait a week to find out about it, he doesn't yet have a majority in the Senate that he can work with. And we've got to pick up those 2 Senate seats. And I hope Kat is down there registering voters up till December 5th, which is the voter registration deadline there. I hope people start voting early, December 14th. And I hope that on Election Day, January 5th of next year, we put 2 Democrats in the U.S. Senate from the blue state of Georgia.
Yeah, I hope so too. Sujana, like your reference to the red mirage. I like that wording as well. Let's see who else is watching, and then we'll go to Ilina with some questions. Jonathan's watching from the East Village, where he's watched 244 episodes in a row. So thank you, Jonathan, for being here. Ashok says hello from Mumbai. My mother's watching from Kerala in India. I don't know if any of you have been to Kerala, but it's a fabulous place. And hi, Amma, love you very much. And Paula's watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Big fan of Ilina's. And Paula is a great, great person. Nicolette is watching from Orlando. Welcome, and thank you for being here. Sneha is watching from California, and thank you, Sneha, for watching. And Sujana Chandrasekhar is tagging your friends. Everybody do this right now. Share this on your Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn, and people can watch this live or later, and they will learn. And Sujana is a physician, a ENT surgeon who has her own show that we help her with. It's called She's on Call, and it's every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And she says, my dad left his hospital bed with the physical therapist in order to take a cab to his polling place vote for HRC in the 2016 primary, and then cab it back to start his daily PT. So no excuses for Georgia, I guess, is the message here. But that's an incredible story to do that for the primary. And so I'd like to ask Ilina about your work. What did you learn in your work you did in North Carolina? Even though at the end it may not have been a victory, still there was a lot of new voters who voted for who voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Can you tell us what are some things that you learned that might be helpful in Georgia?
Well, I think that we have to reach people earlier. You know, I think it's a mistake for us to go to communities only when we need them to do something for us. We have to be engaged in communities from the beginning. Part of my day job is in community engagement and for a nonprofit. And so I understand that we can't go to people and say, hey, I'm Ilina, I need you to come support my organization. It's like a courtship. And so I think that we have to be entrenched in communities. We have to listen to people. We have to understand what their concerns are, what their issues are. We can't just show up and say, we need you to pull us out of the weeds. And I think that we as a party, at least in my state, have failed to do this time and time again. We treat voting as a transaction instead of as a relationship. And I think we have a very short window of time to reach voters in Georgia right now. And actually, Nicolette from Orlando, she and I were texting over the weekend and said, if it takes us to fly down to Georgia and knock on doors together, we'll do it. We'll do whatever it takes. We don't even need to work in our own communities. And so I think that we have to get out there and listen. And part of the sense of disenfranchisement also comes from a lack of people feeling represented. And by representation, I mean that we don't see people who look like us in most tables that are decision-making tables, right? Whether it's in a boardroom, whether it's in a business, or seats of government from municipal all the way to federal. And so that's another angle that, again, we're not going to change that between now and Georgia's runoff, but these are the kinds of things we have to look to long-term, is we've got to get people in the pipeline who understand the communities that we want to improve and help and support. You'll see in my my headshot that I sent you, I'm wearing a sweater that says representation matters. And that's been my battle cry for so many years. I know my friends are tired of me saying it, but I truly believe that we have to see ourselves in places, and more importantly, other people have to see people like us in these places. And I think that's the power of seeing someone like Kamala Harris as vice president-elect right now. It's an extraordinary thing for my Indian family to see her. I mean, this is a woman named Kamala Devi who's going to be our vice president. Who would have ever imagined that was going to happen in this country? And the power of that's extraordinary. So I think that we have to treat voting like a relationship. We have to view this like a courtship where everyone has something to gain. Right now, we have politicians who say, I need you to do this for me. And maybe if you're lucky, I'll do something for you in return, but most people don't feel the benefit of that. And I think we have to really reframe how we've been approaching the electorate. I think it's past time.
Thank you. I want to just point everyone to your background as an editor, because you look at all these pencils that are there where you're pointing out the spelling of your, and a lot is not a word. I like that as well. And everyone, please follow her. She's ILINAP on Twitter. And then you have to tell us what ENFJ is.
Yeah, that's my Myers-Briggs, ENFJ. I have taken that test so many times, and it is always exactly the same.
Extrovert, I've gotten the rest. What is it?
Extrovert and intuitive, feeling and judging.
Okay. You're the mother of teenagers. You have to be judging, otherwise you won't make it through, right?
Seriously.
And last thing, tell us about Dirt and Noise. What an unusual name for a blog, Dirt and Noise.
Yeah, so I started my blog in 2008 totally on a whim, because a friend had started a blog, and I thought, well, if Tony can do it, I can do it too. And I have 2 sons, and they say boys are a combination of dirt and noise.
Oh.
And so I named it Dirt and Noise, and also with the double entendre of just dishing dirt and making noise about issues in the community that matter. So for the last 12 years, I've been writing, not as often the last couple years. I've been a little busy with other things, but I have kept my blog alive, and I write about community issues. I used to write a lot more about issues related to my kids, but of course, Sree, you know, as teenagers, I'm not going to out them, and certainly I'm not going to out myself on anything that would embarrass. And of course, my Twitter feed probably embarrasses them anyway. They hear a lot from their friends. They're like, oh my gosh, Mom, what are you saying now? They're just jealous I have more followers than them. But I do write about politics and community issues, and it is a place where I opine. So some of the backlash I get, people will say, you're not sharing the full story. And I say, I'm not a journalist. If you don't like it, don't read it. I've always said I am my own target audience.
One last thing about your family, since you named your sons on your blog, they have unusual names, it appears.
They are nicknames. I don't use their real names.
Oh, okay, got it. Yes. All right, so let's just quickly, before I go to Kat with a question, let's see who else is here. I see Kati Joshi is here. Kati says, I need to make a video like that about read the syllabus. She's a professor, and students don't read the effing syllabus. So I think that's what she's alluding to. She also wrote a very important book about white Christian privilege and was a guest on our show. And she is connected to John. John, tell us about her.
She's about 15 feet in that direction right now. No, Kathy is how I know you, Sree, and how I'm as connected as I am to India. But she's my wife. We've been married 21 years this year.
And her book is called White Christian Privilege, The Illusion of Religious Inequality in America.
Yes. White Christian privilege, the illusion of religious. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to Kat. Kat, can you tell us what it's like to wake up that day? Because you were, I presume, you were starting your day because you're 3 hours behind. It was about 8:30 in the morning when the news came in about the election results. Where were you? When did you hear? And what does it mean to you to have someone from California, a woman of color, a Black woman, a South Asian woman, to be vice president elect?
Yeah, first I do want to throw out that the deadline to register in Georgia is December 7th. So 2 extra days there. So everybody, and really important, if you got an absentee ballot for the general election, you still have to re-request one and re-request it right this second. They're not going to just automatically send you another absentee ballot. I'm in LA. I'm a pretty early riser, and so I was probably up at like 6, and I like walked the dogs, and then I went for a run, and I came in, and I don't usually have the news on in the morning, but obviously I've had it on every second since Monday. I was at a point, my friends, we were all texting all day Friday. We've been like, no, they couldn't call this. Like, we know what this looks like. We see where the numbers are going. Most of my friends work in policy or politics. But one of my friends before we went to bed, she said, look, I'm calling it, and I declare Biden the winner. Like, it was, but so there was all this, sort of anxiety because one number, we knew where it was going, and we were like, just call it. And so when I finally heard them on the TV call it, I kind of didn't believe it at first. Like, it's fun. There are these like waves of emotions. At first I was like, I don't know, this is just in my head because I've been staring at Steve Kornacki for a week now in the same panel. I'm just imagining this. And then when I realized that they actually finally called it and my phone was blowing up, at first I was hit with this joy that I didn't expect. I really didn't expect to be, overwhelmingly excited. I knew, all right, partially because it had been so long, partially because, by election day, I was just absolutely exhausted. And then nobody slept for a week. We've all been going through, this whole country and the world have been just sharing trauma for a year now. And, I felt this whole wave of excitement, and, my first, I was, oh my God, Trump lost. This actually happened. And there was this whole election, it wasn't obvious who was going to win. And it really took me about an hour of being so excited and seeing sort of people on the streets and talking to my friends and family. And then I realized, oh my God, we have a woman vice president. And then, oh my God, and she's Black and South Asian. Oh my, it didn't hit me because I was just so relieved that Trump lost. And then there was the whole glorious 4 seasons total landscape that will always be the highlight of my life. That always will be the greatest thing that ever happened. And then it was thrilling, A, because it's been 2 freaking years, so it's about time. B, because this was in a lot of ways a very frustrating election for young people of color, because as usual, like 2 700-year-old white men, and it's exhausting. And both of them have a tendency to say racist things and to be really out of touch, and to have this woman who is, for a politician in the White House, very young, and who is so intelligent and who is like biracial, just thrilling. And I love it when Black women get things, but I love it when women of color get things, because we get a lot of like, we're gonna fight you until the death, and so be like, oh my God, like I was texting all my Indian friends, were so excited. They're like, you guys deserve to have a thing. I'm so excited. For us in California, it's really exciting. Look, I'm a wonk. I'm always involved in elections. I'm thrilled because now we get to have, a big Senate election, possibly 2 if Feinstein retires. Plus we have a mayoral election in LA. 2022 is going to be an incredible year, and I can't wait. But it's also exciting because, we're always talking, and I'm on the board of a PAC here called California Women's List, and our goal is to help the California state legislature reach parity. We're not there yet. We're 21st in the country for the number of women in the state legislature, the percentage, which is ridiculous for a state that considers itself as progressive as California. And one of the things that we're constantly looking at and thinking about is bench building. And my C4, the Project AD Action Fund, we endorsed 2 incredible women of color, one Holly Mitchell, who ran for Board of Supervisors, and one Nithya Raman, who ran for LA City Council, and they both won. And we have all of these, small local offices where really incredible women won. And we're trying really hard in the state to build a bench. And so when someone like Kamala goes from, a smaller office to Senate to the White House, and now is perfectly primed to be our first female president, it's really exciting because it's a way for us to look when we're recruiting women in California and women in local office around the country and say, look, if you start here, you can end up there. And, for us to be able to build that bench, for us to be able to reach our goal of reaching parity in the state legislature, I think Kamala's example really helps with that. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see. And, California gets ignored in elections because everybody knows where our electoral votes are going to go. So they just come here and raise money, and then they spend all their time in Ohio. And so it's really, really exciting that the largest state in the union, the fifth largest economy in the union, that we finally have someone in the White House to represent us. So it's really exciting.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I want to point everyone to Cat Calvin, LA. And it says you're not based in LA. It's based in the same town where that purple bag behind you is about. So tell everybody about the town you put on your Twitter bio and what that purple bag behind you is.
Themyscira is home of the Amazons and Diana, Princess of Themyscira, also known as Wonder Woman. Look, who's not a fan of Wonder Woman? Who hasn't always been a fan of Wonder Woman? Also, a woman who graduated from my college, Mount Holyoke, was one of the women who helped create Wonder Woman. But I love the Amazons and, Valkyrie and the Dora Milaje. Like, female warriors are just always so badass and so incredible. And my real name, Kelly, means warrior princess. So I always grew up being told that I was a warrior princess. And, I do archery and I just love the Amazons. And if I could live anywhere, Themyscira has no men and all of the women are totally badass warriors. It's the greatest place on earth.
That is awesome. John, can you reflect a little bit on the electoral map and what we now have to understand? She mentioned that California gets ignored. And by the way, California is still counting, and there's still, I believe, maybe another 1 million votes will be added or counted, I guess. But places like Ohio are now, I don't think, are battleground states. Even Florida, is it any more battleground state after this election? What do you think is going to happen going forward?
I think Ohio and Florida may both have made their way off of the battleground list, but it's important to remember why and what that tells us about what we still need to do when it comes to voting rights. 2 years ago in Florida, the voters overwhelmingly passed a referendum that would restore the right to vote to people with felonies. Felony convictions in Florida to rob you of your right to vote for life. The voters of Florida saw fit by a 60-40 margin to get rid of that rule with its obvious racial and class biases. So what did the Republican legislature of Florida do? They said, okay, sure, you can re-register to vote after you've paid all your fines and fees. And somehow, remarkably, the courts did not find the idea that you have to pay money to the state in order to get your right to vote back to be a poll tax, when it so obviously is. When I was in court representing the DNC against the RNC in a long-running voting rights litigation here in New Jersey, it was back in 2009. And they put up on the screen with a projector in the courtroom a picture of newly elected President Barack Obama and his Attorney General Eric Holder, and basically said, obviously, racism in voting is gone. It's over. The problem's solved. Everything is going to be fine. So please let us out of this consent decree that we've been under because we kept discriminating against voters of color. Well, newsflash, if 2020 has told us anything, if the difference between a 10-minute, 15-minute wait to vote in suburban Atlanta versus a 5 to 10 hour wait to vote in the minority communities in Atlanta, Georgia, tell us anything. If some of the rest of what we've seen tell us anything, if the Florida legislature's pulling back of that right to vote for people who are putting their felonies behind them tells us anything, it's that the work of voting rights is nowhere near done. And we need to elect 2 people in Georgia who are going to work with a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president to get a new Voting Rights Act put into place, to establish protections so that you don't have, when it comes to a fundamental right, 50 different versions of how this works. So Kat doesn't have to say, read the effing directions, because there's 51 different versions of them across the country. States get to run their elections. That's fine. But there should be basic standards about access to the ballot. We know what clears the path to the ballot. It's early voting. It's ample opportunity to register up to and including election day registration. It's a simple process for the ballot. It's making sure that people who have re-earned their right to vote after coming out of jail or prison have an easy time re-registering, that 18-year-olds have an easy time registering and then voting from college. We need to make all of those things national standards that are designed to make it easier for eligible voters to vote. What we have right now is example of Republican success in not trying to win the election by having better ideas and getting more votes, but trying to win the election by making sure the people I don't think are going to vote for them don't get their votes counted. That's the common theme that we see across what they've been doing all year. It's the common theme you're going to see across the litigations that are coming. And it's something that all of us need to fight against, to restore federal standards to make sure that the principle of voting is, what the founders said, that government relies on the consent of the governed, not just the consent of the governed that have the economic wherewithal to vote easily and not suffer the disadvantages of other voters. That's the essential next piece of the work starting in January.
Yes, and we have so much to do. I want to point out that we actually, the opportunity to ask for your ballot in the portal to request a mail-in ballot for Georgia's January 5th runoffs is now online. So if you're in Georgia and if you wish to vote by mail, ask now, as Kat just said. Make that request, please. There it is, ballotrequest.sos.ga.gov. I think there's almost something poetic about having SOS. It probably stands for something else, but having
Secretary of State.
Yeah, but it just adds to the drama of this thing that it shouldn't be there by putting an SOS right into that. We are almost out of time. I want to give each of our speakers a chance to give us some final thoughts. What are you thinking about? What are you going to be looking at the next few weeks? And any advice for our viewers who are obviously very grateful to hear from all of you. Here's a nice comment. Jagan says, love the narration. Congrats to all the participants. Good job. Thank you so much. So let's go to Kat to start us off.
Well, I thought that elections were over and I was just going to chill and end the year. And then Georgia decided to be a real Florida. And so now we've got runoffs that are not only runoffs, but incredibly critical. They'll determine the balance of the Senate. And so Spread the Vote, we actually launched in Georgia. We work there every day, have for several years. And so we have a now full-fledged electoral plan. We'll be getting IDs. We'll be registering voters. We'll be sending thousands more election guides for the runoff to shelters, church, jails, etc. We'll be signing up Georgia jails for our vote by mail-in jail program. We will be calling and texting young voters of color who didn't vote in 18, who didn't early to them about this election. We'll be targeting youth voters. 23,000 17-year-olds who weren't 18 for the general election will be 18 for the runoff, and so we will be trying to register those young voters.
So just those 3 months, or in those few months, they turn around.
Yeah, it's incredible. There are a lot of teenagers in Georgia apparently, and so we'll be working on getting them engaged. And so we've got staff and volunteers on the ground in Georgia, and woke up this morning and started training and started planning and started getting guides to the printers and all the things. We have a very short timeline. The voter registration deadline is December 7th. Early in-person voting starts on the 14th of December, and the election is January 5th. So we have to be on the ground and running. And now our holiday season will be Georgia season. Thank you, Georgia voters, for that.
Well, thank you very much, Kat. Kat Calvin is our guest. She's the founder of spreadthevote.org. She's at Kat Calvin LA, maybe the only person in the world who's an equal fan of Wonder Woman and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, as you can see on the screen there. Thank you very much, Kat. We're very grateful to you. Let's go to Ilina. Thank you for joining us, Ilina. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what I want to do is encourage people to get involved. There are so many ways to be a part of your community, and I think we all need to jump on board to help the efforts in Georgia right now. I'm signed up to get some postcards delivered my way. I think we all respond really well to those handwritten personal notes. So there are a lot of ways to participate to help turn Georgia. And I think that there are things that we can do in our own communities. We don't have to wait till 2022 or 2024 to start knocking on doors. I encourage you to contact your own precinct leaders, your own county parties, and see what you can do to get involved in your communities. It's extraordinarily rewarding. I think it's empowering. It's awesome to see people of all ages show up to be a part of their democracy. And I don't say that lightly, but I think that we really need all of these voices at the table, or we're going to continue to see these 100-year-old white men at the table making decisions that don't represent us. And if we're not a part of it, we can't. I don't think we have a reason to complain if we're not going to be a part of the solution. And I do a lot of talking to young people about how to feel empowered and use their voice. And I take for granted that adults know how to do that already, but they don't. And so I think that your voice matters. People want to hear what you have to say. We often say things like, well, I'm just a mom, or I'm just a teacher. And I say, get that word out of your vernacular, and you go in and say, I'm a teacher, damn it, and this is what I want. And I think that we need to start doing that now. So Kat, I'm here to help you. Like I said, I have postcards coming my way. Nicolette and I will go knock on doors in Georgia if we need to, but we're here because we need this as a collective. It's not just for Georgia.
And you will be wearing masks when doing it. So Paula says,
Always.
I wrote this post you wrote right before the election, so you can find it on dirtandnoise.com, and please follow her. She's also on Twitter at Ilina P on Twitter. So thank you very much. And just before we go to John for a final thought, Alex's nightmare says the trumpeters need to get over it. Biden won. Harris is awesome. Jonathan says, great program. Thank you. Kathy says, well said, Kat. Georgia decided to be Florida. And Charles and Mary are watching from New Jersey. Charles Cunnan Carroll is a great supporter of the show, and we're really grateful to them for watching as well. And Paula says, awesome guest tonight. And Jonathan says, and by the way, I remember reading Wonder Woman comics when I was in my early teens, says Jonathan. So that's pretty cool. And I learned today that there's a Mount Holyoke connection to the comic book creator. So over to you, John, for the last word.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, Sree, thank you that we are still talking about the election after the voting has stopped, because this work doesn't end. That's definitely a truism here in New Jersey, where we have an election every year. I'll be on the ballot next year, as will our governor, for each of us seeking our next term. But the work is constant. And what I said a moment ago about how we need to now turn this electoral victory into a set of laws and standards that protect all voters. We need a new Voting Rights Act to honor John Lewis, to honor all those who laid the groundwork for us to be here. And then we're going to need to keep on doing that work. The only thing that does end every cycle is the actual opportunity to vote. There are no do-overs. And Georgia is going to be our next example of, we've got this much time. You know, Kat's got 4 more weeks to register voters. We've got 6 more weeks after that to turn out the vote and change the course of the country, because the right to vote is the right that protects all others. And without it, all others can go away all too quickly. So we've got to keep on doing this fight. I appreciate that you are continuing to shine a light on these issues. I'm looking forward to hopefully some good news out of Georgia, but good or bad, the work continues, and the fight for voting rights is going to be the rest of my career, just like it's been my whole career up till now. So thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you. You are all awesome. We're so grateful. And if you have any materials that you want us to share, please do get in touch when the time comes. We're all very honored that you would spend part of your evening with us. We'll let you get back to, I hope I'm your last equivalent of a Zoom call for tonight. If you're not, I'm really sorry. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.